The sun was dying over the village of Okiaba when Folake felt the first pain in her belly. She was sitting outside her hut, grinding corn with her neighbors, when a sharp ache made her stop and press her hand to her stomach. The other women looked at her with knowing eyes. They had all felt this pain before. Baby was coming. Folake was 30 winters old, and this would be her third child. But unlike the first two, this baby would live. She could feel it in her bones. The first child, a boy named Tund, had come early and died before he could even cry properly. The second, a girl they called Blessing, had lived for only 7 days before fever took her away. Both times, Folake had held their small bodies and wept until her tears dried up completely. The village of Okiaba sat between two rivers in the land that people now called Nigeria. It was a place of beauty once, where the soil was rich and black, where crops grew tall and strong, and where families lived peacefully under the protection of their ancestors. But for the last 3 years the rains had not come. The earth had turned to dust. The rivers had become small streams that could barely fill a drinking gourd. Children cried from hunger, and the old people sat in the shade talking about death as if it were an old friend coming to visit. Khalad, Folake's husband, was a respected man in the village. He was a farmer and a hunter, with strong arms and a calm voice. People listened when he spoke in the gathering of elders. But even Khalad could not stop the drought. Even Khalad could not bring rain from the sky or grow food from dead earth. When the evening came, Folake walked slowly to the hut where she would give birth. Her mother went with her, and Zainab, the midwife who had delivered babies in this village for 40 years, came carrying her leather bag filled with herbs and roots and secret knowledge. "This time will be different," Zainab said, touching Folake's forehead with a cool palm. "I can feel it. The ancestors are watching this birth. Something important is happening." Folake did not answer. She was afraid to hope. Hope had disappointed her twice before, and she was not sure her heart could break again. The labor was long and painful. All through the night, Folake screamed and pushed. Zainab gave her bitter herbs to drink and pressed her strong hands on Folake's belly. The mother sat beside her daughter, singing old songs and wiping sweat from her face. Outside the hut, Khalad paced back and forth, waiting, praying to the ancestors for his wife's safety. When dawn came, when the first light of the sun touched the top of the village, the baby finally came. Zainab caught the child in her wrinkled hands and cleaned the blood and fluid away. She cut the cord that connected mother and child and wrapped the newborn in clean cloth. "It is a girl," Zainab said, and she placed the baby on Folake's chest. Folake opened her eyes and looked at her daughter for the first time. The baby had skin like polished mahogany, smooth and beautiful. Her eyes were open and dark, looking at her mother with a gaze that seemed to know something secret. Her fingers wrapped around Folake's thumb with surprising strength. Folake laughed, a sound of pure joy that she had not made in many years. "She is perfect," Folake whispered. "She is perfect." But then Zainab made a sound. It was not a sound of happiness. It was a gasp, sharp and sudden, like the sound a person makes when they step on a snake. Folake's joy froze in her throat. Zainab was looking at the baby's left shoulder. There, on the smooth mahogany skin, was a mark. It was dark red, almost the color of blood, and it was shaped like a serpent, a snake coiled and ready to strike. The edges of the mark were sharp and clear, not blurred like normal birthmarks. It looked almost alive, as if the snake might uncurl and move at any moment. "What is it?" Folake asked, though she already knew something was wrong by the way Zainab's hands had begun to shake. "The serpent mark," Zainab whispered. "I have never seen this before. In all my years I have never seen this." Word spread through the village faster than the harmattan wind. By the middle of the day people were whispering in every compound. By evening the elders had gathered at Khalad's home. The chief elder was a man named Adakunal. He was very old, perhaps 80 winters, and his back was bent like a curved stick. But his eyes were sharp and bright. People said that Adakunal could speak with the ancestors in his dreams, that he understood the old ways better than any living person. When Adakunal spoke, people listened because they believed he spoke with the voice of their forefathers. Adakunal came to see the baby. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then he reached out one thin finger and traced the serpent mark on her shoulder. His finger shook as he touched it. "This is the mark of the serpent spirit," Adakunal said, his voice very quiet and very certain. "This child is marked by a powerful spirit. The ancestors are angry. They are sending a sign. This girl child will bring bad things to our village. She will bring plague. She will bring more hunger. She will bring death." Folake tried to stand up, but she was too weak from the birth. She tried to cry out, but the words would not come. Adakunal looked at Khalad. The only way to save our people is to return this child to the earth. She must go back to the ground from where she came. Only then will the ancestors be satisfied. Only then will the rains come again. Khalad's face became like stone. His hands made fists and then opened again. He looked at his wife and he saw the tears running down her face. He looked at his newborn daughter, and he saw her small fingers curling and uncurling in sleep. Is there no other way? Khalad asked, though he already knew the answer. There is no other way, Atakunal said. The ancestors have spoken through the mark on this child's body. We must listen or we will all die. That night, when the village was dark and sleeping, Khalad carried his daughter to the sacred grove. The grove was a place where the old trees grew, where the ancestors were said to walk at night. Folake tried to follow him, but her mother held her back, keeping her in the hut even as her screams echoed through the darkness. Khalad dug a hole in the red earth beneath the largest tree. His hands bled from the sharp stones, but he did not stop. When the hole was deep enough, he placed his newborn daughter gently in the earth. He wrapped her in cloth, and he whispered a prayer to the ancestors, asking them to forgive him and to protect his child even in death. Then he covered the hole with earth. When it was done, he knelt there in the darkness for a long time, his shoulders shaking with sobs that made no sound. By morning the rains came. They came so suddenly and so hard that people opened their mouths in the streets to taste the water falling from the sky. The crops that had been dead began to grow again. The rivers became full and strong. The village believed the curse had been lifted. They believed the ancestors were satisfied. But Khalad never spoke again. He carried the weight of that night in his chest for the rest of his life, like a stone that would never become light. 30 years passed over the village of Okiaba like water flowing over smooth stones. The rains came regularly after that first night when Khalad buried his daughter. The crops grew tall and green. The children stopped crying from hunger. The rivers became full and rich with life. People began to believe that the serpent-marked child had indeed been a curse, and that by returning her to the earth, they had saved themselves and their village. Life continued. New babies were born. Old people died peacefully in their sleep. Khalad, though he lived many more years, became a silent man who rarely smiled. He would sometimes walk to the sacred grove and sit beneath the large tree, staring at the ground as if he could see through the earth to something below. Folake, his wife, never fully recovered from the loss. She grew thin and distant, and she died when she was only 50 winters old, her heart simply giving up on beating. The village moved forward without them. Children who were born after that terrible night never even heard the story of the serpent-marked child. The elders who knew the truth kept silent, and slowly, the memory faded like an old cloth left in the sun. The sacred grove became a place where children played and young lovers met in secret. Traders passed through it on their way to other villages. Hunters built small shelters there during the rainy season. But the earth remembers everything. 30 years after that dark night, a tremor began beneath the sacred grove. It started so quietly that no one noticed. A few small stones rolled down a hillside. An animal hole collapsed in on itself. But deep underground, in the red earth where a small bundle had been placed so long ago, something was stirring. On the morning that would change everything, a shepherd boy named Chidi was leading his goats through the sacred grove. He was only 12 years old, with skinny legs and a voice that had not yet deepened. He was singing a song his mother had taught him, something about a bird flying over the river, when the earth began to move. At first, Chidi thought it was an earthquake. The ground shook beneath his feet, and the goats scattered in different directions, bleeding in fear. But it was not the kind of shaking that comes from deep in the earth. This shaking was happening in one place only, beneath the largest tree. Chidi watched, his heart beating fast as the red earth began to crack open. Cracks spread across the ground like lightning, and soil began to tumble into a widening hole. Something was moving underneath. Something was pushing up. Chidi wanted to run. Every part of his body told him to run. But he was frozen, his eyes fixed on the ground as it continued to break open. Then a hand appeared. It was a human hand covered in red clay, with fingers that looked strong and alive. The hand pushed upward and more of the earth fell away. Then another hand appeared, and then an arm, and then a head covered in long dark hair matted with soil. Chidi screamed. He screamed so loud that his voice cracked, and he ran from the sacred grove as fast as his skinny legs could carry him. The goats followed him, their small hooves clicking against the hard ground. What Chidi did not see was what happened next in the grove. The woman pulled herself completely from the earth. She was gasping, her lungs burning as if she had been holding her breath for 1,000 years. She clawed and pushed until she was free of the soil, and then she rolled onto her back on the ground, breathing in great desperate gulps. For a long time she just lay there, feeling the sun on her face and the air moving in and out of her lungs. She did not know who she was. She did not know how she came to be buried in the earth. But she knew that she was alive, and that was enough. When her breathing became calmer, she sat up slowly. Her body felt strange, not old, not young, but suspended in time somehow. She looked at her hands. They were small but strong, with long fingers and clean nails. She looked at her arms. They were smooth and unmarked except for one place on her left shoulder. There, on her mahogany skin, was a mark shaped like a serpent. But this was not a simple birthmark. The mark was glowing, a faint red light that pulsed like a heartbeat. As she watched, the glow grew brighter, then dimmer, then bright again. She touched the mark with her fingers, and she felt a warmth that seemed to come from inside her body. The mark was warm but not hot. It felt alive. The woman stood up slowly, her legs shaky and uncertain. She was wearing cloth that had once been white but was now stained with red earth. The cloth hung loosely on her body, and she realized she had no memory of putting it on. She had no memory of anything except the darkness and the feeling of being crushed by weight on all sides. She looked around the sacred grove. The trees were ancient and massive, their bark thick and dark. Vines hung from their branches like the hair of old grandmothers. Birds sang in the leaves, calling to each other with voices that seemed to welcome her. The woman began to walk toward the village. She moved slowly as if relearning how to use her legs. The earth felt warm beneath her bare feet. Every step felt like a discovery, the feeling of grass, the hardness of stone, the softness of dust. As she walked, she thought about who she might be. She tried to remember a name, a face, a voice. But there was nothing. Her mind was empty of the past, empty of memory, empty of identity. It was as if she had been born that very moment from the earth itself. But she was not empty of feeling. She felt a burning inside her chest, a hunger that had nothing to do with food. It was a hunger to understand. A hunger to know who she was, where she came from, why she had been in the earth, why the mark on her shoulder glowed like a living thing. By the time she reached the edge of the village, people had already heard Chitty's screams. The shepherd boy was running through the streets, telling everyone that a spirit had risen from the sacred grove. The elders were gathering. The women were hiding their children inside their huts. The woman walked into the village square, and every eye turned to look at her. She was covered in red clay from head to foot. Her long hair was matted and tangled. Her cloth was torn and dirty. But her eyes were clear and intelligent, and her skin seemed to glow with an inner light. And on her shoulder, the serpent mark pulsed with a red glow that made everyone take a step backward in fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but she did not know what words to use. She had no memory of language, no memory of how to make her lips and tongue work together to create sound. So instead, she stood there in the village square, gasping for breath, staring at the frightened faces around her, and wondering who she was and why everyone seemed to recognize her, even though she had never seen any of them before. The serpent mark on her shoulder glowed brighter. And in that moment, the village of Okiaba understood that something impossible had happened. Something that should not exist had returned. The curse had come back. But they did not yet know that what had returned was not a curse at all. They did not know that from the earth had risen something far more powerful than fear, something that would change their village forever. They only knew that the girl they had buried 30 years ago had somehow come back alive. The village of Okiaba did not know what to do with the woman who had risen from the earth. Some people wanted to chase her away with sticks and stones. Some people wanted to tie her up and keep her locked in a hut until the elders decided what to do. But the woman did not run and she did not fight back. She simply walked through the village, looking at everything with eyes that seemed to see more than just the surface of things. The first person to approach her was an old woman named Neka. Neka was a grandmother who had lived for 70 winters. Her back was bent, her hands were twisted with pain, and she could barely walk. For many years, she had suffered from a sickness that made her joints swell and ache. The healers had tried everything: herbs, roots, prayers, rituals. Nothing had helped. Neka's granddaughter was too afraid to go near the clay-covered woman, but Neka herself was old enough to know that fear was often just the shadow of the unknown. She walked slowly toward the woman, her stick tapping against the hard ground. "Child," Neka said, even though the woman did not look like a child. "Will you help an old woman?" The woman turned and looked at Neka. Her eyes were dark and deep, like looking into a well at night. For a moment she did not move. Then she reached out and took Neka's twisted hand. The moment her skin touched Neka's skin, something happened. A warmth spread through Neka's hand, moving up her arm like water flowing upstream. The warmth was not burning hot. It was gentle and healing, like the warmth of the sun on a cold morning. The glow in the serpent mark on the woman's shoulder grew brighter, and it seemed to flow through her touch into Neka's body. The warmth spread to Neka's shoulder, her back, her other hand. It moved through her like liquid light, touching every place that had hurt for so many years. And as it moved, the pain left. The swelling in her joints decreased. Her bent back straightened slightly. When the woman let go of her hand, Neka fell to her knees in amazement. She looked at her hands. They were still old, still wrinkled, but they were no longer twisted with pain. She stood up, and for the first time in many years she could stand straight without her stick. "The ancestors have sent us a healer," Neka cried out, and her voice carried through the village like thunder. After that, people began to understand that the woman was not a curse. She was something else entirely. A young mother brought her sick child to the woman. The child had a fever that would not break. The child's skin was hot like fire, and the child could not eat or drink. The mother laid her child at the woman's feet and begged for help. The woman knelt down and placed her hand on the child's forehead. Again, the serpent mark glowed, and the warmth flowed from her body into the child. The fever broke. The child's skin became cool. The child opened her eyes and asked for water. One by one people came to her. A man with a hurt leg that would not heal. A woman who could not see clearly anymore. An old elder whose mind had begun to forget things. The woman healed them all, asking nothing in return, speaking no words, for she still had not learned how to speak, but healing with the touch of her hands and the light of the serpent mark on her shoulder. But there was something else strange about the woman too. Something that scared people even more than her healing powers. She could understand the animals. One day a dog came into the village, barking and jumping at people. The dog was wild and dangerous, and the men were preparing to kill it with their spears. The woman walked out and looked at the dog. She made a soft sound in her throat, not quite a word, not quite a bark, and the dog stopped barking. It sat down and looked at her with gentle eyes. The woman and the dog seemed to have a conversation that no one could understand. Then the dog stood up and walked away peacefully, and it never came back to harm anyone again. Another time, a flock of birds was eating all the crops in the fields. The farmers were desperate because they needed those crops to feed their families. The woman walked into the field and looked up at the birds. She sang a song, the first real sound she had made that was not a healing warmth. Her song was beautiful and strange, in a language that was not any language the villagers had ever heard. The birds listened. They stopped eating the crops. They flew down and landed on the woman's arms and shoulders, as if she were a tree full of resting places. Then they flew away and they never came back to eat the crops again. People began to whisper that the woman could see into the souls of animals, that she could understand what they wanted and what they needed. But the strangest gift of all was that she could see the truth in people's hearts. A man came to the village claiming that he had done no wrong. But when the woman looked at him, she simply shook her head. Later, it was discovered that the man had stolen from his brother and lied about it for many years. A woman was angry at another woman and spread lies about her. But when the woman from the earth looked at them, she pointed to the angry woman, and somehow everyone understood that the lies were false. It was as if she could see through all the masks that people wore, all the pretenses and deceits, straight into the truth of their hearts. The elders became afraid of this power. They gathered together and talked in whispers about what this woman was and whether she should be allowed to stay in the village. But then something happened that changed everything. An old man came to see the woman. He was very old, older than anyone else in the village. His hair was white like cotton and his back was bent with age. He walked with a stick and his feet dragged slowly against the ground. It was Kalad. It was Folek's husband. It was the man who had buried his own daughter in the earth 30 years ago. Kalad looked at the woman for a long time. He looked at her face, her body, her hands. And then he looked at the serpent mark on her shoulder, and he began to cry. "You are my daughter," he whispered. "You are the child I buried. The child I thought was cursed." The woman did not move. She stared at the old man with her deep, dark eyes. Kalad fell to his knees. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry. I did not want to bury you. The elder told me you were cursed. The village told me you would bring death. I was afraid. I was so afraid and I did what I thought would save my people. I am sorry. I am so sorry." He wept like a child, his whole body shaking with sobs that came from deep inside him. The woman knelt down and placed her hand on his old head. The serpent mark glowed, but not with the healing warmth. This time it glowed with a different kind of light, a light that seemed to carry understanding and compassion. And then the woman did something that shocked everyone. She put her arms around her father and held him while he cried. She did not punish him. She did not express anger or rage. She simply held him, and in that holding there was forgiveness. Complete, total forgiveness. Khalad died that night, peacefully, with his daughter's hand resting on his chest. And when the village found them in the morning, they understood that the woman who had been born cursed was actually a blessing that the ancestors had sent them. She was not a curse. She was a second chance. She was proof that even the darkest things could be transformed into light. After Khalad died, the woman who had risen from the earth understood that she needed a name. A name would make her real in the world of the living. It would connect her to the people around her. So she chose a name that felt right in her heart, a name that seemed to carry meaning in the language she was slowly learning to speak. She called herself Adana. Adana means daughter of the father in the old language. It was a name that held both sadness and hope. Sadness for the father she had only just found before losing him, and hope for the new life she was beginning to build. With her name came her voice. Slowly, carefully, Adana learned to speak. The words came out rough at first, like stones rolling down a hill. But bit by bit, she learned how to form words, how to express her thoughts, how to communicate with the people around her. And when Adana began to speak, she had much to teach. She taught the young people of the village, especially the girls, to question the things that elders told them to believe without thinking. She taught them that tradition could be good, but blind tradition, tradition that was followed without understanding why, was dangerous. A girl was buried because of tradition, Adana would say, sitting beneath the baobab tree with young people gathered around her. She was buried because people believed what they were told without asking if it was true. They did not ask the elders to explain. They did not ask themselves if the mark on a baby's skin really meant curse. They simply obeyed, and because of that obedience, a child was placed in the earth. The girls listened carefully. Many of them had been taught their whole lives to obey without questioning. But Adana showed them that asking questions was not disrespect. Asking questions was wisdom. When someone tells you that you must do something because that is how it has always been done, you have the right to ask why, Adana taught them. You have the right to think for yourself. You have the right to choose wisdom over fear. She taught the boys too, but she paid special attention to the girls, because she understood that girls were often the ones most trapped by blind tradition. Girls were told to marry men they did not know. Girls were told to accept pain and suffering as their duty. Girls were told that their voices did not matter. Adana taught them that all of this was wrong. One day a girl came to Adana in tears. The girl's parents had arranged for her to marry a man from another village, a man who had already beaten another wife. The girl did not want to marry him. She was afraid of what would happen to her. Adana listened to the girl's story. Then she walked with the girl to the girl's parents and spoke to them clearly. "This girl has a mind," Adana said. "This girl has a heart. This girl has a voice. To force her to marry a man who will hurt her is to deny that she is a human being. If you truly love your daughter, you will let her choose her own path." The parents were shocked. They had never heard anyone speak this way before. But Adana's words carried the weight of truth, and the girl's parents listened. The marriage was cancelled, and the girl was allowed to choose her own future. Word of this spread through the villages. More girls came to Adana, asking for her help, asking for her wisdom. And Adana helped them all. But Adana did not only teach. She also cared. When her mother, Folake, came to find her after many years of grief and searching, Adana held her and forgave her, just as she had forgiven her father. Folake had been haunted by guilt for 30 years. She had never stopped believing that her daughter was alive somewhere, even though everyone told her the child was dead. Adana nursed her mother in her final years. She sat with her through the long nights when fever came. She held her hand when the pain was great. She whispered words of forgiveness and love into her mother's ears until Folake could finally rest peacefully, freed from the guilt that had eaten away at her heart. When Folake died, Adana wept. She wept for the mother she barely knew, for the years they had lost, for the sorrow that tradition and superstition had caused to her family. But she also understood that her mother's death was a kind of healing. Folake went to meet the ancestors with a light heart, unburdened by guilt. That was a gift. The sacred grove, the place where Adana had been buried, the place of darkness and death, began to transform. Adana returned to the grove and planted new things there. She planted healing herbs and medicinal plants. She built a simple shelter where she could teach and where people could come to be healed. The old trees that had witnessed such darkness began to seem lighter, as if they were shedding the weight of the past. Birds returned to the grove. Animals came there seeking peace. Flowers bloomed where only bare earth had existed before. People from other villages heard about the healer woman who lived in the sacred grove. They came from far away, traveling for days to reach Okiaba. Some came because they were sick. Some came because they had suffered from injustice and wanted wisdom. Some came because they had heard stories about a woman who could see into people's hearts and help them find the truth within themselves. Adana welcomed them all. She created a school in the sacred grove where young people could come to learn. She taught them about healing herbs and how to make medicines. She taught them about the stars and the seasons. She taught them about the old stories of their people, but she taught them to think about those stories, to question them, to decide for themselves what was true and what was superstition. Young women came from villages where they were treated as less than human, and Adana taught them their own worth. Young men came from villages where they had been taught that strength meant violence, and Adana showed them that true strength meant compassion and wisdom. The sacred grove became a place of light and learning. It became a sanctuary where people could come to heal, not just their bodies but their minds and hearts as well. One day, a young girl was brought to Adana by her terrified parents. The girl had been born with a birthmark on her arm, a mark shaped like a flower. The parents believed the mark meant the girl was cursed, just as the people of Okiaba had believed about Adana. Adana looked at the parents with eyes full of compassion. "This mark is not a curse," Adana said. "This mark is unique. This mark makes your daughter special. In my village, a girl was buried because of a mark like this. That was a terrible mistake. Do not make that same mistake. Do not let fear destroy your daughter's life." The parents wept with relief. They had been ready to give up their daughter, but Adana had saved her. This became the work of Adana's life, to save people from the darkness of superstition, to teach them to think for themselves, to show them that fear was often just ignorance wearing a mask. The serpent mark on her shoulder continued to glow, but now people understood that it was not a mark of curse. It was a mark of blessing. It was a sign that Adana carried the power to heal and to transform darkness into light. Years passed. Adana grew older, though she seemed to age more slowly than other people. The young people she had taught grew up and taught others. The sacred grove became famous throughout the land as a place of learning and healing. And Adana sat beneath the baobab tree, surrounded by students and those who came seeking wisdom, understanding that her life, the life that should have ended in darkness buried in the earth, had become a light that illuminated the path for many others. Many years passed after Adana came to the sacred grove. So many years that no one could count them anymore. Young people who had come to learn from her as children now had children of their own, and those children had children. Adana had touched the lives of so many people that her name was spoken with reverence in villages that stretched across the entire land. But something strange happened as time moved forward. Everyone around Adana grew older. Their hair turned gray and then white. Their faces became lined with wrinkles. Their bodies became slow and bent. But Adana remained the same. Her skin never wrinkled. Her hair never grayed. Her body never weakened. At first no one noticed. But as decades passed and people began to pay attention, they realized that Adana did not age like other human beings. She looked exactly the same as she had looked 50 years before. She looked exactly the same as she had looked 100 years before. Adana herself was the first to understand what this meant. One night, as she sat alone beneath the baobab tree looking up at the stars, she realized the truth. She was not fully human. She was not fully spirit either. She was something caught between the two worlds, the world of the living and the world of the ancestors. The earth that had held her for 30 years had changed her. The serpent mark that glowed on her shoulder was not just a mark of healing power. It was a sign that she belonged to a different kind of existence. She was eternal, frozen at the moment of her emergence from the earth, never to grow old, never to die. At first, Adana felt sad about this realization. She thought about how she would watch everyone she loved grow old and die. She thought about how she would continue on, alone, long after all the people she had taught and healed had returned to the earth. But as she thought about it more, she began to understand that this was a gift, not a curse. She had been given the time and the power to help many people. If she lived forever, she could help even more. Still, there was something that called to her. Something that pulled at her heart like a rope pulling a boat across water. The sacred grove called to her. The place where she had been buried called to her. One night, when the moon was full and bright, Adana walked to the place in the sacred grove where she had emerged from the earth all those years ago. She had not been back to this exact spot in a very long time. Other people maintained the grove now, caring for it, keeping it beautiful. But this one place, the place where the earth had opened and she had clawed her way to life, remained empty and untouched. Adana stood over the spot and placed her hand on the ground. She could feel the earth beneath her palm warm and alive. She closed her eyes and remembered everything. She remembered the darkness. She remembered the weight of the soil pressing down on her. She remembered the moment when she broke through to air and light. She remembered her father's tears. She remembered her mother's joy. She remembered all the people she had healed, all the girls she had taught to value themselves, all the people she had freed from the chains of superstition and fear. A soft light began to glow from the serpent mark on her shoulder. The light spread through her body like sunrise spreading across the sky. It grew brighter and brighter until it seemed like she was standing in the middle of a star. The people who were sleeping in the nearby village woke up and saw the light coming from the sacred grove. They came running, thinking perhaps the grove was on fire. But when they arrived, they found Adana standing in the moonlight, glowing like something not quite of this world. "Do not be afraid," Adana said to the people who gathered around her. "It is time for me to rest. It is time for me to return to the earth that held me, protected me, and gave me the power to help you all." An old woman stepped forward. She was one of Adana's first students, now bent and gray but still strong in spirit. "Will you leave us?" the old woman asked, and her voice was full of sorrow. Adana smiled. It was a smile full of peace and understanding. "I will never truly leave you," she said. "I will only be returning to where I began. But know this, I will always be here. In the trees of the grove. In the healing herbs that grow. In the wind that carries wisdom. In the hearts of those who choose love over fear." Adana turned and looked at the earth beneath her feet. She knelt down and placed her hands on the ground. Immediately the earth began to soften. It became like water, flowing and yielding. Slowly, gently, Adana began to sink into the ground. The people watching did not cry out or try to stop her. They understood that this was something that had to happen. This was Adana's destiny, written in the serpent mark that had been on her body since the moment of her birth. As Adana sank deeper into the earth, the serpent mark on her shoulder glowed brighter and brighter. The light spread outward, touching the trees of the grove, touching the grass, touching the soil itself. Everywhere the light touched, things began to glow with a soft red radiance. When Adana had completely disappeared into the earth, the light did not disappear. Instead it changed. The glow became gentler, softer, spreading through the grove like the warmth of a protective embrace. The people who had gathered to watch Adana return to the earth stood in silence for a long time. Then the oldest elder spoke. "She has become the spirit of this grove," he said quietly. "She has become the protector of this land." After that night, strange and wonderful things happened in the sacred grove. Plants grew more abundantly. Animals came there seeking shelter and found peace. People who came with troubled hearts found their troubles eased just by walking among the trees. Sick people came and were healed by drinking water from the streams that flowed through the grove. Some people said they had seen a woman walking among the trees at night, glowing with a soft red light, the shape of a serpent visible on her shoulder. They said she was Adana, returned to her earthly form, watching over those who came seeking help. Others said that Adana had become something even greater, that she had become the spirit of wisdom itself, present in every act of kindness, in every person who chose love over fear, in every heart that rejected superstition and chose truth. The village of Okiaba became famous throughout the land. People came from far and wide to learn in the sacred grove, to be healed by its mysterious power, to understand that fear and superstition were chains that could be broken, and that love and wisdom were the keys to freedom. Generations passed. Centuries passed. The stories of Adana were told and retold, changing slightly with each telling but always carrying the same central truth. A girl had been born cursed. She had been buried in darkness. But from that darkness she had emerged as a light. And when her earthly work was done, she had returned to the earth to continue her protection, her healing, her teaching from beyond the veil between worlds. And in the sacred grove, if you listen carefully on moonlit nights, you can still hear the whisper of her voice carried on the wind, teaching, healing, reminding all who listen that the darkest places can become the brightest lights, and that love is the only power that truly matters. The serpent mark that had been a curse became a blessing. The child who should have died became eternal. The grave that was meant to be the end became the beginning. And Adana, daughter of Folake and Kalad, child of the earth and child of the sky, continues her work even now, forever watching, forever teaching, forever loving those who have learned to love themselves.